Did he do that to you?
Who did this to you, Savannah? The room froze. The clatter of dishes, the murmur of polite conversation, even the jazz piano in the corner all seemed to pause as if time itself was holding its breath. Savannah's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly, but no sound came out. Her hand instinctively pulled down her sleeve, hiding the bruises she hadn't meant to reveal. That one sentence spoken in a voice that was calm, deep, and impossibly powerful shattered her silence. He saw her, and not just as a waitress, not as a black woman in a pristine uniform, not as someone trained to say "yes, sir," with a smile, no matter the insult. He saw her. This was the moment that changed everything. It started, as these things often do, with a routine. Tuesday lunch crowd, business suits, designer handbags, overconfident laughter. And Savannah, always moving, always smiling, always invisible. But that day, Caleb Morrison, the billionaire CEO of one of America's fastest-growing tech empires, walked into the Manhattan Grill. And nothing would be the same after. Savannah had worked there for nearly 2 years, in a city that celebrated diversity with headlines but dismissed it behind closed doors. She knew her place. Say nothing. Smile. Don't speak unless spoken to. Apologize for things that aren't your fault. She knew how to survive. What she didn't know, what no one could have expected, was that a man with more power than anyone in that room would not just notice her, but stop his entire world for her. Caleb noticed everything. The way she flinched when the manager barked her name, the slight limp in her left step, the careful way she folded napkins to hide the tremor in her fingers. And then he saw the bruise. Most people wouldn't have, most people don't want to. But Caleb Morrison wasn't most people. And when he asked that question, not even looking at her arm but right into her soul, it was the first time someone had ever asked. This wasn't just a chance encounter. This was a story buried beneath years of silence and shame. A black story no one wanted to tell until now. Here at Hidden Worth, we don't just tell stories, we uncover them, we amplify the unheard. And this story is going to shake you. So if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or unworthy, stay. This is your story too. And if you're already feeling that knot in your throat, don't look away, because what Caleb did next shocked everyone. If you were just passing by, you'd think it was the kind of restaurant where everything gleamed a little too bright, where the steak cost more than your grocery bill for the week, and where the waitstaff moved like synchronized dancers. The Manhattan Grill wasn't just any high-end spot, it was a statement. A place where Wall Street giants brought their clients, where influencers snapped photos of $40 salads, and where no one really noticed the people carrying the plates. Except Savannah. Savannah worked the lunch shift 6 days a week. She wore a crisp white button-down, black vest, and slacks so well pressed they could cut paper. Her curly hair was always tied back in a neat bun. Not because she wanted to, but because the manager had once pulled her aside and told her that wild hair might make certain patrons uncomfortable. She never forgot that. Neither did she forget the time a customer handed her a tip with 2 fingers, like it was contaminated, or the time she heard a table of executives joking that she was probably on parole. They laughed. She smiled. And then she took their order for grilled salmon with extra lemon. That was the game. Keep your head down. Don't react. Don't remind them you're a person. At 22, Savannah had mastered the art of invisibility, not by choice, but by survival. Every table she approached, every drink she poured, every insult she absorbed with a smile, was another step in a dance she never agreed to learn. But she was good at it. Too good. To most, Savannah was just the pretty black girl with the killer smile and soft voice, the one who moved with grace, the one who remembered your drink order, the one who never caused a scene. But behind that smile, Savannah carried stories she never told. She grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, one of 3 kids raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs. Savannah learned early that being strong wasn't a choice, it was an expectation. Her mom would always say, "Don't give them a reason, baby. Don't talk back, don't cry, don't mess up, and most importantly, don't ever let them see you bleed." So when Savannah got to New York with a scholarship she earned on pure grit, she thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally be treated as more than just a statistic. But then came the bills, the student loans, the unpaid internships, the landlords who smiled until they saw her credit score. And soon enough, she was standing in front of the Manhattan Grill in borrowed heels, asking if they were hiring. They were. But what they didn't say out loud was this: "You'll be the only black waitress on the floor. You'll smile when the busboys call you names in Spanish. You'll stay silent when the hostess gives your tables to someone blonder. And you'll say thank you when someone calls you articulate, like it's a compliment." She learned to breathe through her nose when the weight of it all got heavy, to nod when the older male patrons asked if she was from here, to pretend she didn't notice when customers left without tipping, to answer to girl like it was her name. Still, Savannah found little ways to reclaim herself. A red notebook tucked in her apron where she scribbled poetry on her breaks. Her Spotify playlist filled with Nina Simone and Janelle Monáe. That tiny silver necklace her mom gave her, the one she hid under her collar, but touched whenever she felt alone. Savannah didn't complain, didn't push back, didn't break. But she was tired. Tired of swallowing words, tired of apologizing for taking up space, tired of being tired. And the thing about pain, especially the kind that lingers, is that it doesn't always show up with screams or bruises. Sometimes, it hides behind perfect posture and polite smiles. Sometimes, it shows up in silence. That's where Savannah was when Caleb Morrison walked in. She didn't know who he was that day. She just knew he looked like power in a tailored suit. Like wealth that didn't need to be loud. Like someone who didn't flinch when she said good afternoon. And maybe that's why she dropped the tray. Maybe that's why her sleeve slid up. Maybe, just maybe, something deep inside her was done hiding. The third time Caleb Morrison walked into the Manhattan Grill, it wasn't coincidence. It was intention. He had returned not because the food was exceptional or because the ambiance felt warm. It wasn't the perfectly grilled ribeye or the $80 bottle of Cabernet that brought him back. It was her. He didn't know her name yet, but he knew the way she moved. The quiet way she navigated the chaos of a crowded lunch rush. The way her eyes flickered down just a second too long when certain customers raised their voices. The way her shoulders stiffened when the manager approached, and the way her jaw clenched when she walked past the kitchen doors. Caleb was a man who built empires by reading people. Investors, rivals, auditors. He could tell when a man was bluffing in a negotiation or when a handshake meant trouble. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was something else. That afternoon, he sat at table 7, near the window. Not his usual corner booth. He wanted to see more. Savannah didn't notice him right away. She was busy, as always, graceful, precise, carrying trays with the kind of balance that came from repetition and muscle memory. But eventually, she turned and their eyes met. Just for a moment. And Caleb saw it. The flicker. That tiny, instinctive panic in her pupils. The kind you can't fake. The kind that says, "I'm afraid you've seen too much." She turned quickly, pretending to check on another table. But it was too late. He'd seen it. The dark, fading bruise just above her wrist, half covered by a rolled sleeve that had slipped slightly as she reached for a wine glass. It wasn't fresh, maybe a few days old, but it wasn't nothing. He wasn't imagining it. Now he couldn't unsee it. He watched as the manager called her over, watched her nod too fast, smile too tight, watched as she slipped behind the service station, her shoulders dropping just slightly when no one else was looking. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was calculating. Back in his office, Caleb built tech systems that could detect anomalies in millions of lines of data. He trusted instinct, but more than that, he trusted patterns. And there was a pattern here. Savannah, though he still didn't know her name, was moving like someone trying not to be noticed, someone trained to be invisible, and it infuriated him. Because he had been that person once too. Different circumstances, different context, but the same feeling. He remembered the time he was 11, walking through the front doors of a suburban department store with his aunt. He had his hands in his pockets because it was cold. Security followed them through 3 aisles before stopping them, demanding to see a receipt they didn't have. They hadn't bought anything. They had just walked in. His aunt's voice trembled with rage, but she didn't argue. She held his hand tighter and said, Don't react. They're expecting you to. That moment taught him more than any Harvard lecture ever could. Don't give them the satisfaction. But also don't forget. So now, sitting at a table where his very presence made waiters nervous, Caleb didn't forget. He noticed Savannah the way only someone who had lived her kind of quiet pain could notice. When she finally approached his table, he didn't look at the menu. He looked at her. Up close, the bruise was clearer, fainter now, old, fading, but real. And the smile she wore, it was wrong. It was too rehearsed, too careful. The way people smile when they've been told, over and over again, don't let your face show how you feel. Afternoon, sir, she said, voice soft and professional. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a sleek black business card. Just in case, he said, sliding it gently across the table. She looked at it, then back at him, eyes cautious, confused. You're not in trouble, he added quickly. I'm not here to scare you. Her lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came. Sometimes, someone just needs to notice, he said. That's all. She blinked, stunned, and gave a tiny nod, then walked away. The moment passed. The lunch crowd buzzed. Plates clinked, forks scraped porcelain. The world moved on. But something shifted in the air, and somewhere deep inside Savannah, a long-buried hope stirred. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't invisible anymore. The apartment Savannah rented was nothing fancy. Second floor, no elevator, peeling paint near the stairwell, a window unit that whined louder than it cooled, but it was hers. A quiet box in the middle of the Bronx, filled with second-hand furniture, a cheap lamp that flickered if you touched it wrong, and a tiny kitchen where she made dollar store pasta and called it dinner. It was home, kind of. That night, after the shift ended and she'd handed over her apron, Savannah unlocked the door with her usual care, not because of the lock but because of the neighbor's dog. A wiry little thing that barked like it had something to prove. She dropped her bag by the couch, pulled off her shoes, and walked to the bathroom. The lights buzzed overhead. She turned the faucet and let the water run. And then, for the first time all day, she rolled up her sleeve and looked. The bruise was still there, yellow around the edges, a deep purplish blue in the middle. Not fresh, but not gone either. She touched it lightly and winced. He hadn't meant to do it, he'd said. It was stress, just a misunderstanding. She'd pushed the wrong button. Again. She always seemed to push the wrong button. Savannah stood there, staring at herself in the mirror. 22 years old, and already so damn tired. Not from work. Not from being on her feet 10 hours a day. Not from smiling through the insults or biting her tongue when a table snapped their fingers like she was a dog. No. She was tired of being afraid. Tired of walking on eggshells in her own home. Tired of pretending that what happened behind closed doors didn't count because there were no police reports, no broken bones, just bruises that faded and words that echoed in her head long after he slammed the door. You're lucky I even put up with you. Why do you always make me look like the bad guy? You think you're too good now, huh? Just 'cause some rich guy noticed you? That last one echoed especially loud tonight. She hadn't told him about the business card. She hadn't even taken it out of her pocket. But somehow, he knew. She could feel it in the way he looked at her that morning. Suspicious, possessive, like she belonged to him, like her worth depended on how small she could shrink. Savannah turned off the faucet and leaned over the sink, breathing slowly. This wasn't new. She'd seen it before growing up. Her mom had dated men who were quick with their hands and quicker with apologies. Savannah used to hide in the closet when yelling turned to slamming. She'd press her little hands over her ears and count to 50. Then 50 again, and again, until the silence returned. She used to promise herself that she'd never live like that. But promises get blurry when you're broke and tired and the world makes you believe you're hard to love. That's the part no one tells you. It's not just about fear. It's about erosion. A slow, steady wearing down of your voice, your worth, your will. Savannah pulled the card out of her coat pocket and stared at it. Matte black, clean font, Just a name, Caleb A. Morrison, and a number. No title. No company. Just presence. She didn't dial. Not yet. But she put it on her nightstand. Not in her bag, not tucked in a drawer. Out in the open. Visible. A possibility. Then she sat on the edge of her bed and exhaled. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Somewhere, a couple argued through thin apartment walls. The city moved on like always. But inside her little second-floor box, something shifted. It was faint, like the first crack of dawn through blackout curtains. But it was real. And even though her arms were still sore and her heart still carried the weight of silence, there was a whisper now. Just a whisper. But it said, "This doesn't have to be your whole story." The boardroom was nothing short of intimidating, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan, a sleek black table that could seat 20, and a silence so sharp you could hear the click of a pen from across the room. But Caleb Morrison didn't flinch. He never did. In a world where rooms like this were built for men who didn't look like him, he'd learned to walk in like he owned the place because now, he did. Caleb sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled, eyes focused. The morning sun cut across the windows, casting long shadows on the polished floor. Across from him sat his executive team, diverse on paper, cautious in practice. They were the best in their fields, or so their resumes claimed. But even now, years into his billion-dollar tech empire, Caleb still felt the whispers in the room before the meeting even started. And today, those whispers felt louder. It started when Paul, head of finance, white, Ivy League, leaned back in his chair and smiled. That kind of smile. The kind people use before they say something sharp, but try to make it sound like a joke. "So," Paul said casually, "word is you've been eating lunch in the Bronx now?" A few people chuckled, mostly those who wanted Paul's approval. Caleb didn't blink. "I eat where I want," he replied, voice calm but edged with steel. Paul shrugged. "Of course. Just seems off-brand for someone who built a company on innovation and luxury. You know, tech elite and all that." There it was. The old game. Disguised critique, polished condescension, wrapped in laughter to keep it palatable. Caleb leaned forward, slowly, just enough to make the room still. "Tell me, Paul," he said, voice low. "What do you think innovation looks like?" Paul paused. Disruption, mostly. Breaking patterns." "Exactly," Caleb nodded. "Disruption. Not staying comfortable, not playing it safe." He looked around the room. "I built this company because the old rules didn't work for people like me. I'm not about to start living by them now." Silence. No one spoke. Not because they agreed, but because they knew better than to challenge him when his voice dropped like that. Caleb sat back, but his mind wasn't on them anymore. It was on her. Savannah. He hadn't been able to shake the look in her eyes. That bruise, that smile, that moment where she tried so hard to disappear even when he made it clear he saw her. It was haunting. Not because she was broken, but because she reminded him of who he used to be, of who he could have become. He remembered the internship interview back in 2007, how he wore his best suit, how he spoke clearly, respectfully, confidently, and how, at the end of the interview, the hiring manager, an older man with soft hands and a sharper smile, leaned back and said, "You're very articulate, impressive really, but I think we're looking for someone who fits our environment a little more naturally." That was the day Caleb realized the rules weren't written for him, and they never would be. So he stopped playing their game, and started building his own. Now, as CEO of Nexora, one of the fastest scaling AI platforms in North America, Caleb had everything they said he'd never get. Power, influence, access, respect. But none of it meant anything if he couldn't use it. If he couldn't shift even one narrative. If he couldn't help someone like Savannah feel like her story wasn't just one more page in a book no one wanted to read. The meeting wrapped with dull applause. Something about Q4 earnings, market expansion. Caleb barely registered it. When the room cleared, he stood alone, looking out at the city skyline. The morning fog had burned off, and the streets below bustled with movement. He pulled out his phone and tapped a contact, a private investigator he'd used before. "Her name's Savannah," he said, voice steady. "She works at the Manhattan Grill. I want to know who's hurting her." Discreetly. The man on the other end didn't ask questions. That's why Caleb trusted him. After the call, he exhaled slowly. This wasn't business. This wasn't strategy. This was personal. Because when the system teaches people like you to disappear, sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to look away. And Caleb Morrison? He never looked away. Not anymore. Caleb Morrison had learned long ago that the loudest man in the room was rarely the one in control. Real power moved quietly. And when he decided to act, he did it with the precision of a man who had built billion-dollar systems to predict the unpredictable. Emotion never led his choices. Strategy did. But this time, something was different. He wasn't just solving a business problem. He was stepping into someone else's silence, and that meant everything had to be done right. No headlines. No press releases. No heroic speeches. Not yet. He started where he always did. Information. Within 24 hours of that boardroom meeting, his investigator had returned with a file. Slim, but heavy. Her name was Savannah Noel Clark, 22, Mississippi-born, full academic scholarship to NYU, dropped out after sophomore year. Currently living in a rent-controlled walk-up in the Bronx, working full-time at the Manhattan Grill for the past 19 months. No police record, no hospital admissions, no visible signs of official complaints. But the unofficial? They were everywhere. The investigator had talked to a busboy who quit after only 2 weeks, claiming the manager was trigger-happy with his temper. A former waitress described the workplace culture as toxic, especially if you're not white and blonde. And one bartender, now working uptown, said he saw Savannah pushed once during a busy shift, but when he brought it up, he was told to keep eyes on drinks, not drama. Caleb read every line in silence. Then he read it again. Every piece of paper only confirmed what he already knew in his gut. She wasn't exaggerating. She wasn't overreacting. She was surviving. That afternoon, he called in his legal team, not the public-facing ones, but the private, quiet ones. The kind who knew how to dig through paperwork and find the rot under the foundation. "I want a full audit," he said calmly. "Ownership structure, HR records, incident reports, OSHA compliance, anything with her name on it, get it." They didn't ask who her was. They knew better. Next came media. Not press yet, but whispers. He reached out to a young black journalist he trusted, someone hungry, someone who still believed reporting could change something. Caleb gave her nothing directly, just a tip, a name, a pattern. "I can't give you the story," he told her, "but I can tell you where to look." And then he waited. But he didn't wait idly. He moved funds through one of his nonprofit channels, an emergency assistance initiative for women of color facing workplace harassment. It had existed on paper for over a year, underused and overlooked. He doubled the funding, tripled the outreach, assigned a team to relaunch it with a new face. He never said Savannah's name, but everything he touched was now shaped around what he saw in her. Still, Caleb knew better than to underestimate his opponents. People who ran places like the Manhattan Grill didn't operate on kindness. They operated on image, on silence, on reputation, and when that was threatened, they fought back. So he stayed a ghost in the machine. Emails with no headers, phone calls with no names, a soft, deliberate dismantling from the inside. Because sometimes, the most dangerous man in the room is the one who never raises his voice. While the investigation expanded, he made a quiet visit. No security. No driver. Just him. In a dark coat and baseball cap, blending in like every other overworked New Yorker trying to stay warm. He didn't go inside, the Manhattan Grill. He stood across the street, watching. It was late, past the dinner rush. Savannah stepped outside, wiping her hands on a towel, taking a breath of night air. She looked tired. Not in the way people say when they yawn between emails. She looked tired in her bones, tired like the weight of being seen but never acknowledged was crushing her shoulders. She didn't notice him. He didn't need her to. He just needed to remember. The real reason he'd built everything he had wasn't to sit at the top of some tech empire. It wasn't for the money or the accolades. It was for this. To be able to do something when no one else would. To be the kind of man who didn't just survive the system, but dismantled it. Quietly. One brick at a time. Caleb Morrison didn't believe in looking back. He believed in momentum, in forward motion, in building instead of brooding. But even the strongest men carry ghosts. And sometimes, they don't knock before showing up. That week, after watching Savannah from across the street, he returned home to his penthouse in Tribeca. It was late. The city glowed beneath him like a galaxy flipped upside down, so alive, so loud, yet strangely hollow. He poured a glass of water and stood by the window, the night quiet pressing against the glass. And then, without warning, it came back. The memory. 12 years old. 7th grade. A private school he'd earned a full scholarship to, a fact the staff loved to remind him of. He wore his uniform a size too big, his shoes second-hand, but his posture straight. Caleb was smart. Gifted, they said. A natural with numbers. A quiet boy who spoke only when it mattered. But on that particular morning, none of that saved him. He had been standing in the hallway, locker open, arranging his books by subject, neat, precise, organized. And then came the nudge. Subtle, sharp. A shoulder from behind. "Move it, Charity Case." The words were low, too low for the teachers to hear, but loud enough to sting. He turned and looked at the boy, Ryan Caldwell, tall, blonde, from money. The kind of kid who wore a Rolex in 8th grade because his dad said he'd earned it. Caleb didn't say anything, just stepped aside. Ryan laughed. Didn't think so. That should have been it. But later that day, during gym, it escalated. The coach had paired them up for basketball drills. Caleb didn't mind. He liked the game. He was quick, sharp, strategic. But Ryan didn't like being outplayed. So on the 3rd round, when Caleb moved past him with ease, Ryan shoved him hard, sent him sliding across the hardwood. The room went silent. The coach looked up. What happened? Ryan didn't miss a beat. He tripped. And the coach nodded. That was it. No investigation, no questions. Just a quiet understanding of whose story would be believed. Caleb got up slowly, jaw tight. He wasn't hurt, not really. But something inside him cracked. Not from the fall, but from the weight of being invisible even when you were the one bleeding. That night, he went home to his grandmother, his rock, his reason. She sat him down, looked him square in the eye, and said, "They're gonna tell you your place, baby. Every room you walk into, somebody's gonna try to shrink you, but don't you ever let them. You hear me?" He nodded. But he didn't cry. He never did. Not even when they moved neighborhoods because the landlord said their kind made the property harder to lease. Not even when his SAT scores were re-verified 3 times because they were suspiciously high. Not even when he got into Stanford and a classmate asked if it was because of diversity. No, he never cried. He just remembered. And he built. 1 internship, 1 degree, 1 rejected loan turned into a funded pitch, turned into a startup, turned into a revolution. He learned to wear tailored suits and speak in boardroom code. Learned how to walk into a room full of men who judged him before he spoke and still leave with their signatures on a contract. But underneath it all, he never forgot what it felt like. To be pushed. To be lied about. To be hurt in plain sight and have no one believe you. That's why Savannah's bruise hit different. It wasn't just about her. It was about every time the world told someone like her to sit down, shut up, smile pretty, and stay in her place. Caleb sipped his water and stared out at the skyline. He had built an empire. But what good was an empire if you couldn't use it to reach back and pull someone forward? That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he sat in the stillness and made a list of names, of numbers, of steps to be taken. Because if the system taught people to break in silence, then maybe it was time to break the system. And Caleb Morrison? He never forgot where he came from, which meant he would never forget who he was fighting for. The Saturday crowd at the Manhattan Grill was heavier than usual. Weekend brunches were always chaos, bottomless mimosas, loud laughter, and tables filled with people who treated waitstaff like background noise. Savannah had learned to survive these shifts the same way soldiers learn to survive battles, one breath at a time. She'd tied her hair tighter that morning, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The bruise on her arm had faded into a dull shadow, but she still wore long sleeves. She told herself it was to stay professional, but deep down, she knew it was still about hiding. "Savannah," the manager barked from across the floor. His name was Greg, a man who believed volume equaled authority. "Table 12's been waiting. Move faster, sweetheart." "Yes, sir," she said automatically. She moved toward table 12, a group of 3 men and a woman, all dressed in designer casual. They laughed too loud, smelled like champagne, and looked at her the way people look at someone they'll never respect. When she reached the table, one of the men, a red-faced banker type with a loosened tie, snapped his fingers. "Finally," he said. "Thought you forgot about us." Savannah smiled politely. "Sorry for the delay, sir. What can I—" He cut her off. "You can start by getting my order right this time. Last week, some girl brought me medium rare instead of medium. Hope it wasn't you." The table laughed. Savannah swallowed. "I'll make sure it's perfect, sir." He smirked. "That's what I like to hear." She walked away, head down. But someone at another table saw everything. Caleb Morrison was sitting in the corner booth, watching. He wasn't supposed to be there that day, but something in his gut had told him to go. Something about the silence of that week felt unfinished. He didn't recognize the man yet, the banker, but he recognized the tone, the entitlement, the poison disguised as humor. It was the same tone he'd heard from investors who called him articulate, from politicians who shook his hand but never looked him in the eye. Caleb didn't move at first. He just observed, calculating. Then it escalated. Savannah returned with the drinks. The banker leaned back in his chair, smirking, and said, "Hey, sweetheart, how about a real smile this time? You look like you're serving time, not brunch." She forced a grin, setting the glasses down one by one. But when she placed his drink, he reached out and grabbed her wrist right where the bruise had been. "See, that's better," he said, squeezing just enough for her to flinch. Her eyes darted around. The other waiters pretended not to see. The manager was busy flirting with the hostess. "Let go," she whispered. "What's that?" he said louder. "Didn't catch that, sweetheart." She pulled her hand back, trembling now. The laughter from the table grew, and then click. Someone at another table had started recording. At first, Savannah didn't notice. She just wanted to disappear. But within seconds, a voice from the bar shouted, "Hey man, knock it off." The banker turned, indignant. "Mind your business." The man holding his phone didn't. "No, seriously, you're harassing her. We all saw it." The room went quiet. The banker stood up. "You don't know what you're talking about." The man filming didn't back down. "I got the whole thing. You want me to tag the restaurant when I post it?" Savannah froze. She wanted to melt into the floor. The last thing she wanted was attention. But it was too late. The video was already uploading. Caleb stood, his voice even but powerful. "You should leave." The banker turned, ready to snap back until he saw who had spoken. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Wait, aren't you?" "Yes," Caleb said flatly. "And if you don't walk out right now, I'll make sure your employer knows exactly how you spend your weekends." The man's face drained of color. He grabbed his jacket and stumbled out, muttering under his breath. The restaurant buzzed with whispers. Savannah stood frozen, clutching her tray, not sure whether to thank him or apologize. Caleb didn't say anything. He just gave her a look, steady, quiet, protective, and left. By the time she clocked out that night, the video had gone viral. 300,000 views in 6 hours, then 1 million. Comments flooded in, some supportive, some cruel. People dissected her every move, her tone, her silence. They debated whether she had provoked him. By morning, the Manhattan Grill was trending on Twitter. Savannah's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls from news outlets, messages from strangers, a text from an unknown number. "You're brave. Don't let them spin it." She didn't know it yet, but that number belonged to Caleb. In his office, he watched the video again, jaw tight. The internet called it the Waitress video. A few outlets labeled it Black Story of the Week, like it was entertainment instead of evidence. He turned off the screen. This wasn't about going viral. This was about exposure. And exposure, he knew, was the first crack in any system built on silence. For the first time, the world had seen Savannah, and Caleb Morrison was just getting started. Caleb Morrison didn't believe in revenge. Not the kind people romanticized in movies, not the quick, explosive kind that burned everything down in a day. He believed in precision, in long plays, in justice that left no room for excuses, only accountability. And now, it was time. The video of Savannah had taken the internet by storm. Overnight, she went from anonymous waitress to symbol of systemic mistreatment. The Manhattan Grill's Yelp page was flooded with angry one-star reviews. Activists posted screenshots, influencers weighed in, even late-night hosts made offhand comments. But that wasn't justice. That was noise. Caleb knew better than to count on the public's short attention span to fix anything. So he moved. First, he called his head of communications. "I want a formal statement from Nexora," he said, "but not about me, about workplace dignity, about how we treat people in power and out of it." His head of comms hesitated. "But if we don't mention you—" "Exactly," Caleb interrupted. "This isn't about me." The statement went out that afternoon. Short, direct, and powerful. "At Nexora, we believe every person deserves respect, whether they're writing code, waiting tables, or cleaning the floors. Power means protecting those without it." No logo, no hashtags. It went viral anyway. Next, Caleb reached out to a legal aid nonprofit that supported women of color in workplace harassment cases. He didn't just cut a check, he partnered with them. A year-long funding initiative, quiet but effective, with specific grants earmarked for restaurant and hospitality workers. Savannah didn't know any of this yet. She was still hiding, still trying to make sense of the whirlwind she'd been pulled into. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Reporters parked outside her apartment. Customers from the restaurant sent messages, some supportive, others calling her a liar. She hadn't been back to work. She didn't know if she could go back. And she still hadn't called the number on the business card Caleb had given her. But he didn't push. He waited. Meanwhile, the Manhattan Grill was collapsing from the inside. Greg, the manager, had been suspended, pending investigation. The owner issued a statement that reeked of PR jargon, calling Savannah valued and respected, even though she'd been begging for fair treatment for over a year. But Caleb wasn't interested in apologies written by attorneys. He wanted change. So he bought them, quietly, through a shell company, a silent acquisition. It took a team of lawyers 3 weeks to finalize the paperwork. No press release, no tip to the media. Just a clean transaction, brokered by a man who didn't care about steaks or brunch menus but cared deeply about sending a message. Savannah would be the first to know. He didn't text her. He showed up at her door. No entourage, no suit. Just Caleb, in jeans and a plain sweatshirt, holding a folder. When she opened the door, she looked stunned, like seeing a memory in real life. "Hi," he said gently. "Hi," she echoed, unsure whether to step aside or close the door. "I won't stay long," he promised. "I just wanted you to have this." He handed her the folder. Inside, legal documents, ownership details, a letter of intent. "I bought the restaurant," he said simply. Savannah blinked. "You, what?" "I'm not keeping it. I'm donating it to a local nonprofit that runs hospitality training programs, real ones. They'll turn it into something better, something that actually serves people, pays fair wages, promotes people like you." She stared at the papers, speechless. "And Greg?" she asked. "Fired," Caleb said. "Officially, permanently, no severance." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then finally, "Why?" He didn't hesitate. "Because someone should have done it a long time ago." Savannah nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the folder. "I'm not asking for anything," Caleb added. You don't owe me gratitude, or press, or a quote from my biography." She cracked a small smile at that. "I just wanted you to know," he finished. She looked at him differently now, not as a billionaire, not as a rescuer, but as someone who understood. Someone who had once needed someone too. Caleb turned to leave, but before he reached the hallway, her voice stopped him. "Hey, Caleb?" He turned. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me." He nodded once. "You were never invisible," he said. "The world just refused to look." And with that, he left. Not to applause, not to cameras, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that this time, the silence had finally broken. She didn't ask to go viral. Savannah Clark just wanted to get through the day. But the world had other plans. By the end of that week, her face was everywhere. News anchors said her name like it was a headline. TikTok creators reenacted the moment with dramatic music. Twitter debates erupted about race, gender, class, most of it loud, some of it helpful, and plenty of it exhausting. Everyone had an opinion, but few cared to ask how she felt. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't an activist. She was a two-year-old black woman who had worked hard, stayed quiet, and played by the rules. And now, the world knew her as the viral waitress. The name stuck. It was on t-shirts, hashtags, memes. Some of it felt surreal. Some of it felt insulting. Because she wasn't a character. She wasn't a brand. She was a human being. And for the first time in her life, she realized just how easily the world could turn your pain into content. One morning, she walked into her corner bodega and the cashier smiled. "Hey, you're that girl from the video, right?" She forced a smile. "Yeah. Crazy stuff," he said, shaking his head. "You're famous now." She nodded and left, her orange juice untouched. Famous for what? For being humiliated? For being hurt in public? For being a woman who didn't fight back because she'd learned the world punishes women who do? She wasn't sure what was worse, the silence that had surrounded her life before, or the noise that followed now. It felt like being shouted over in a room full of microphones. Then came the emails. Hundreds of them. Job offers, speaking requests, brand deals. Everyone wanted a piece of the story, but none of them knew the story. Not really. They knew the 30-second clip. The moment a man grabbed her. The moment she flinched. The moment she didn't cry, didn't scream, just stood there, exposed, in a room full of strangers. But they didn't know what happened before that. Or after. They didn't know about the years of being told to smile, to be grateful, to never complain. They didn't know about the shifts where she cried in the freezer because someone called her just another angry black girl. They didn't know about the long subway rides home, playing Nina Simone in her earbuds, telling herself she was more than what the world saw. No. They only knew what fit inside a trending soundbite. So she stayed quiet, let the frenzy move around her. Until one night, she opened her laptop and saw a message. It was from a podcast. Not a big one. Just a young black woman in Atlanta who hosted a show about dignity, survival, and black voices that often got buried. The message was simple. You don't have to say anything, but if you ever want to tell your story in your own words, the mic is yours. Savannah read it 3 times. Then she replied. 3 days later, she sat in her bedroom, still small, still cluttered, still hers, and pressed record. Her voice shook at first, but then it didn't. She talked. Not just about the incident, but about everything before it. About Jackson, Mississippi. About NYU. About the systems that push people like her to the margins, and the strength it takes just to keep showing up. She didn't script it. She didn't rehearse. She just spoke. And it was raw. Painful. Beautiful. The episode aired that Friday. It didn't go viral like the video. It didn't crash servers. But the people who needed it most heard it. Other waitresses. Students. Survivors. Women who had been told to be quiet and be grateful. Men who had never realized how much harm a single joke, a single touch, a single silence could do. The podcast reached 50,000 downloads in a week. then 100. And for the first time since it all began, Savannah felt seen not as a symbol but as a person. Not the viral waitress, just Savannah. No longer hiding behind a smile, no longer shrinking to make others comfortable. Just a young woman, telling her truth in a world that finally had to listen. The moment Savannah's voice hit the airwaves, something shifted subtly, then unmistakably. It wasn't the kind of shift you felt in viral likes or trending hashtags. It wasn't explosive. It was quieter, deeper. And it started inside the very system that had once ignored her. Corporate America. The boardrooms. The execs. The brand managers who had once seen people like Savannah only as consumers, not as individuals worth listening to. At first, they reacted the way they always did. With strategy. With spin. With memos full of buzzwords. Words like diversity, inclusivity, awareness. But Caleb Morrison had seen that playbook before. He'd watched corporations write apologies while changing nothing. He knew the script and how empty it could be. So he didn't wait for them to get it right. He cracked them open. From the inside. Caleb called for a private meeting, not with PR teams, not with investors, but with other CEOs. Executives from companies that shaped culture. Tech giants, fashion moguls, hospitality chains, entertainment networks. He called it a values roundtable. No cameras. No press. Just power, behind closed doors, asked to answer one question. What are you really doing when no one's watching? Some of them came reluctantly. Some came because they didn't want to be next. But they came. And Caleb didn't waste time. He played the clip, not the viral video, but a segment from Savannah's podcast. Her voice steady, tired, full of truths no marketing deck could sanitize. The room was silent. Then Caleb leaned forward. You all know how to scale product, he said. How to increase user retention. How to pivot when the market shifts. So tell me why you still don't know how to protect your people. No one spoke, because there was nothing left to say. He continued, you build culture whether you mean to or not. Every hiring decision, every policy you ignore, every time someone reports a manager and nothing happens, you're building something. He paused, letting the weight settle. The question is, are you building a business or a machine that devours its own? They listened, not because they cared yet, but because Caleb had what they all wanted, influence and integrity. He didn't preach, he challenged. And in the days that followed, cracks began to form. One Fortune 500 company quietly audited its HR department. Another replaced 3 executives in the hospitality division. A major food chain announced a restructuring of its internal reporting process, citing inspiration from recent events, without naming names. It wasn't perfect, but it was movement. Savannah watched from a distance. She hadn't returned to restaurant work. She didn't need to. Offers had come in, some genuine, others opportunistic. But she was taking her time. She didn't want to be anyone's diversity hire. Didn't want to be paraded in front of cameras like some proof of progress. What she wanted more than anything was space to breathe, to think, to build something that wasn't just survival. One morning, she got an email. It wasn't from a brand or a network. It was from a woman in Detroit. Mid-40 seconds, former line cook, single mom. The message was short. I heard your podcast. I left my job today. I was tired of pretending I was okay. Thank you for speaking. You reminded me I'm not crazy. Savannah stared at the screen for a long time. Then she replied, not with advice, just with truth. You're not crazy, and you're not alone. She began replying to more emails. Not all of them, but the ones that felt real. And slowly, something new began to take shape. Not a platform, a community. People from different states, different industries, different lives, but the same ache, the same exhaustion, the same longing to be seen and heard and believed. They started gathering online, Zoom calls, message boards, late-night voice chats. It wasn't activism in the traditional sense. It was healing. Collective, quiet, radical. And Savannah? She was right at the center. Not because she asked to be, but because when a crack forms in something massive, sometimes the light that comes through needs someone to guide it. Meanwhile, back in corporate towers with glass walls and quarterly bonuses, the whispers continued. Some execs dismissed it as a moment. Others saw it for what it really was. A fracture. The beginning of something too deep to patch with policy or PR. Because when someone tells their story in their own words and the world listens, that's not a trend. That's a threat. To the system. To silence. To the kind of power that counts on people staying quiet. And Caleb Morrison? He wasn't about to let it fade. Not when the cracks were finally showing. Savannah didn't expect to hear from him again. Not after everything. Not after the video, the podcast, the headlines, the silence. And yet on a rainy Thursday morning, as she sat at the corner table of a neighborhood cafe sipping lukewarm coffee, her phone buzzed with a name she didn't recognize. But the message? She knew who it was. I'd like to meet. No pressure, just coffee. Caleb. Her heart thudded once, heavy and uncertain. She stared at the screen, rereading the short message like it held some hidden code. She hadn't spoken to him since he showed up at her door with the folder, with the news he'd bought and given away the restaurant that had once swallowed her whole. She remembered how calm he'd looked. Not heroic, not proud. Just grounded. Like a man who'd done what needed doing and didn't want applause for it. Now he was asking for coffee. No pressure. Just coffee. She hesitated. Then typed, tomorrow, same cafe, noon. She didn't even have to say which cafe. He showed up 5 minutes early, dressed simply dark jeans, a heather gray hoodie, umbrella in hand, raindrops still clinging to his shoulders. When he saw her, he smiled but didn't move until she did. Savannah gave a small nod, and he crossed the cafe, sliding into the seat across from her without ceremony. Thanks for coming, he said. I figured you wouldn't ask unless it mattered, she replied. That made him smile. I wanted to tell you something in person, he said. Something that's not public. Yet. Savannah leaned back, both guarded and curious. Okay. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slim envelope. He didn't slide it across the table. He just held it. I'm launching something new, he said. A foundation. It's been in motion for a while, but this moment, your moment, accelerated it. It's called the Clark Initiative. Her brows shot up. You're naming it after me? Yes, he said simply. Because you reminded me what power is for. And because the work we're doing, it's your story, multiplied. She didn't speak. Not yet. He continued. It's not just a fund. It's education, mentorship, legal protection, mental health resources, a safety net for women of color in frontline jobs, restaurant staff, retail, hospitality, the ones who hold up the economy and get none of the credit. She blinked, slowly. You don't need my permission, she said carefully. I'm not asking for it, he replied. I'm offering something else. He finally placed the envelope on the table. You're not a symbol, Savannah. You're a leader. Whether you want to be or not, people are listening. They're following. They're watching how you move next. This, he tapped the envelope, is my invitation for you to move with purpose. She hesitated before picking it up. Inside, a formal letter, an offer, not a job, a role. Director of Story and Impact. A position built around her voice, her lived experience, not to sell a product but to shape the very direction of the foundation. It came with a salary that made her breath catch. Resources. Support. Freedom. You could say no, Caleb said softly. You owe me nothing. You don't have to be anyone's inspiration. But if you do say yes, I promise you'll never have to shrink again. Savannah stared at the page, then at him. Why me? She asked. You could have chosen someone more polished, more experienced. Because polished people don't scare systems, he said, but real ones do. Silence hung in the space between them. Then Savannah did something she hadn't done in a long time. She smiled. A full, real, unguarded smile. The kind that didn't hide pain. Didn't apologize for taking up space. "I'm not used to people handing me power," she said. Caleb leaned in. "I'm not handing you anything. I'm just recognizing what's already yours." She nodded slowly, then extended her hand. "Okay," she said, "let's build something." And just like that, two people who'd spent their lives navigating systems that tried to erase them made a quiet decision to rewrite the blueprint. Not with press conferences, not with trending hashtags, but with one powerful offer: accepted. Savannah sat on the edge of her apartment bed late that night, the rain tapping faint rhythms against the window pane. The city's glow beyond the curtains flickered in and out, like a heartbeat. She held the letter in her hand, the one offering her the role as Director of Story and Impact for the Clark Initiative. A name that echoed her own story, now echoed back to her. Her mind raced. She thought of the nights she cried in a bathroom stall at work, of the shift when her voice cracked and no one asked if she was okay. She thought of counting change to see if she could afford rent and groceries in the same week. She thought of the times she swallowed her dignity just to keep her job. But she also thought of that coffee meeting, his quiet confidence, the way he didn't beg her acceptance, and of the tears she cried when her story found its voice in that podcast recording. She thought of all the complaining she refused to voice, and all the silence she chose when speaking up felt dangerous. This offer was more than a job, more than a title. It was an invitation. She stood up and moved to the mirror, staring at herself at the young black woman in a plain t-shirt and jeans. Her eyes looked tired, but steady. Her reflection whispered, "You deserve more than invisibility." Her phone buzzed. A notification. New email, Caleb Morrison. She hesitated, then opened it. He'd written a short message. "No hurry. Take your time. I believe in your choice, whatever it is." It hit her harder than a demand. He believed in her choice. Not expecting agreement, not presuming gratitude. Just belief. She sat back down, breathing deep. The next morning, she walked to the cafe where she and Caleb had first met for that simple conversation. She ordered a decaf black coffee, no milk, no sugar, and sat at a corner table, watching people pass. Then she pulled the envelope back out, reading the terms again. Salary, support, role, resources. It was generous. It was strategic. It recognized the value she never got paid for: the emotional labor, the resilience, the stories she carried. She saw the cost in her mind too. This path would open her up. Critics would scrutinize every word she said. People who never wanted to hear her voice might try to keep her silent again, this time with louder tools. She'd have to carry expectations, to be the model victim turned leader, to represent an entire cause, to not break, to not show doubt. That was pressure too. She put the letter down. She closed her eyes, letting her heart speak before her logic. Then she opened them and considered what she'd already survived. The days she got up anyway, tongue bitten, spirit bruised. The times she swallowed fear so deeply it felt like she forgot how to breathe. Maybe this was another kind of fight. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Caleb. "I accept. Let's build." She didn't hit send right away. She paused. She thought, even if people doubt me, even if I fail, even if I lose my voice again, I'll try. Because not trying means accepting that my story ends in silence. Then she pressed send. Immediately, her phone lit up with a reply. "Welcome aboard." It was understated, perfect. She closed her eyes for a moment, a steady breath, and then leaned forward to sip her coffee. Even the steam felt warmer than before. In the weeks that followed, Savannah's life shifted. She gave notice at the Manhattan Grill. Her manager looked surprised, his eyes narrowing as though he thought she was bluffing. Some co-workers cheered quietly. Others avoided her. She packed her apron, her pens, her notebooks. She walked out the back door like someone shedding a skin. That night, she called her mother back in Mississippi. Her voice cracked when she said, "Mom, I did it." Her mother paused, then cried, "I knew you would, baby. I always knew." Savannah cried too, not tears of fear or defeat, but tears of release, of having made a choice, of choosing herself. On her first official day with the Clark Initiative, she walked into an office with a view of the city she loved. She sat at the desk given to her. She pulled out her notebook. She started planning. Who to support first, what resources to allocate, how best to honor the stories she would invite in. She thought of all the women who'd messaged her, the ones afraid, the ones hurting, the ones whose voices trembled in private. She pictured projects, grants, workshops, storytelling labs, a safe space, a legacy. She also thought of critics, of pushback, of nights she would question if she chose the right path. But she had made a choice, and choices have weight and power. That night, she stood at the window, looking at the lights spread across the city like embers. She whispered, "This is mine." And somewhere across kitchens, across late-night buses, across hospital corridors, other women whispered it back. Because when someone chooses their voice finally, they become permission for someone else to do the same. She wasn't just the viral waitress. She was a choice. Her own. In a world that moves too fast, where news fades in 24 hours and stories are traded for clicks, Savannah Clark's journey didn't go viral to become a spectacle. It became a mirror. For all of us. Because this wasn't just about one waitress in a downtown restaurant. This was about power. And what happens when it goes unchecked? It was about silence. And who's expected to carry it? It was about dignity, how easily it's denied, and how fiercely it must be defended. We must learn that visibility isn't the same as voice. Going viral doesn't mean justice. Sometimes, it just means being consumed and forgotten faster. Savannah's story mattered not because it made headlines, but because she decided it wouldn't end in shame. She chose to speak, to stay, to lead. And Caleb Morrison, he showed us that power, when used right, doesn't silence people, it amplifies them. It stands beside them, not in front. He reminded us that leadership isn't a title. It's responsibility. It's listening when others are unheard. It's seeing who's missing from the room and making space, not excuses. We must learn that no system is too big to be questioned, and no voice is too small to matter. That change doesn't always come from the top, it rises from the moments we choose courage over comfort. From the times we stand up instead of stepping back. From the choices we make, not just for ourselves, but for those who've never been chosen. Savannah didn't want fame, she wanted safety. She didn't want attention, she wanted respect. And in the end, she gave us something bigger than both. A blueprint. A way to move forward. A reminder that progress doesn't come from waiting on better people, it comes from becoming them. So if you're still listening, ask yourself, where are you standing? Are you the bystander watching injustice? Are you the voice speaking against it? Or are you the one pretending not to see it? Because the truth is, you are in this story too. And you have a choice, right now, to do something, to say something, to be more than a headline reader, to be the reason someone else feels safe, seen, and supported. And if this story moved you, if Savannah's courage made you stop scrolling, even for a moment, don't let it end here. Share her story. Tag someone who needs to hear this. Drop a comment below. What part of Savannah's journey hit you the hardest? This isn't just content. This is hidden worth. And every time you listen, really listen, you help make the invisible visible. So here's your call to action. Be the crack in the silence. Be the echo of the voice someone lost. Be the one who doesn't look away. Because the next Savannah, she's watching. And she's waiting for you to see her.